She was the people's princess.
I think it was a brilliant portrait of the woman I knew.
How many times shall we remember her? In how many different ways?
Because it hit exactly the right tone.
The people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her.
I couldn't believe the scenes I was seeing, that people were literally weeping as they laid flowers.
We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock.
The year is 1997. The date is August the 31st. A few hours earlier, the news had come through that Diana, Princess of Wales, had been killed in a car crash in Paris. Tony Blair was about to reflect on her life and her death.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her two sons, the two boys.
The news had come through in the middle of the night or very early morning, and the world was in shock, really. And everyone was confused and looking for someone to say something. Tony Blair was a very new Prime Minister at this time, but he came in front of the cameras just a few hours after the announcement of Diana's death. And he made what I think was a really masterful speech. Looking back at it now, because I was in the thick of the reporting then and I didn't really have time to take it in, but looking back at it now, it really was a superb piece of work. Tony Blair came with his family to position himself in front of the cameras near a church, which was, of course, terribly fitting. He looked very grave, he looked nervous. He fiddled actually with his cufflinks in a rather royal way. And then he took to the microphone. He then went on to say what I think we were all feeling at that time was, what about those boys? What about William and Harry, who had been woken up just a few hours earlier to be told by their father that their mother had been involved in a car crash and that she hadn't made it. And he said that our hearts went out to William and Harry, and I think that was so true.
We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock, in mourning, in grief that is so deeply painful for us. She was a wonderful and a warm human being. Though her own life was often sadly touched by tragedy, she touched the lives of so many others in Britain, throughout the world, with joy and with comfort.
As soon as the news had broken, people started going down to Buckingham Palace. I was reporting for the BBC, and I'd had to drive through the night to get back to the studios from where I was. And I couldn't believe the scenes I was seeing, that people were literally weeping as they laid flowers outside Buckingham Palace. Briefly, he acknowledged Diana's personal difficulties because, you know, we have to realise that Diana was huge news at this time. She was on the front page of every newspaper. For years there'd been the rumours and then the confirmation that her marriage had collapsed completely. And in the few weeks before she died, we'd all been seeing pictures of her in the south of France with Dodier fired, apparently having found some new love or a new flirtation anyway. And he expressed how difficult life was for her at this time, and what a tragedy it was for everyone.
How many times shall we remember her? In how many different ways? With the sick, the dying, with children, with the needy. When with just a look or a gesture that spoke so much more than words, she would reveal to all of us the depth of her compassion and her humanity.
I think one of the most perceptive things he said actually was a portrait of her. I mean, I knew Diana, I knew her pretty well. And I thought when he said how we will remember how with just a touch or a gesture, she showed her compassion, and that words weren't really needed by her. And I thought, wow, yeah, that made me think immediately of how she shook hands with a person suffering from HIV in New York, I think it was, and suddenly the world's perception of AIDS changed. I thought of her touching the foot of someone suffering from leprosy, and that had the same effect. She was brilliant at sending out a message without words, and Tony Blair grasped that.
You know how difficult things were for her from time to time. I'm sure we can only guess at, but the people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her.
And I think he hit it spot on when he said that everyone regarded Diana as one of theirs. She was one of the people. She was, she wasn't quite so remote perhaps as the rest of the royal family. I think that's absolutely true. Diana was more accessible. She was the one, I suppose, we saw first of all dropping down on her knees, crouching down to talk to children or to talk to someone in the wheelchair. She was the one who began to touch, cuddle, hug. She was far more tactile than we've been used to with members of the royal family, and Tony Blair got that and understood that that's why she was so loved by the nation. And then there was the great dénouement, the pièce de résistance, if you like, the climax of his short but very effective speech.
They regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
Now, I don't think that this just came to him spontaneously. I'm quite sure, I imagine that this is what he had planned. And I just wonder whether there was a little bit of Alistair Campbell, his spin doctor, involved in that. But it was a great phrase, and it stuck. And it has stuck ever since, really. Diana was the people's princess. She did change the monarchy. And Tony Blair summed this all up in a few short sentences on one of the most dramatic days in the royal family in my lifetime and in the lifetime of almost everyone in the country. I think it was a brilliant portrait of the woman I knew, and a tribute to a princess who was incredibly popular. And who I think everyone felt we knew her just a little bit, because we'd followed her life and the ups and downs of her life for so many years. I mean, for people today, they just can't understand what huge news she was. I mean, bigger than any of the royals today. She was just everywhere, and she was very loved.